When everything seems to be going against you, remember that the airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, was an American captain of industry and a business magnate. He pioneered the development of the assembly line technique of mass production. Henry Ford was born on July 30, 1863, on a farm in Greenfield, Township, Michigan, to William and Mary Ford. Ford was devastated when his mother died in 1876. He was just 13 years old. His father expected him to eventually take over the family farm, but he despised farm work. He later wrote, "I never had any particular love for the farm. It was the mother on the farm I loved." His father gave him a pocket watch in his early teens. At the age of 15, Ford dismantled and reassembled the timepieces of friends and neighbors dozens of times, gaining the reputation of a watch repairman. In 1879, at the age of 16, Ford left home to work as an apprentice machinist in Detroit, first with James F. Flower and Brothers, and later with Detroit Dry Dock Company. In 1882, he returned to Dearborn to work on the family farm, where he became adept at operating the Westinghouse portable steam engine. He was later hired by Westinghouse to service their steam engines. During this period, Ford also studied bookkeeping at Goldsmith, Bryant, and Stratton Business College in Detroit. Ford married Clara Jane Bryant on April 11, 1888, and supported himself by farming and running a sawmill. They had one child named Edsel Ford. In 1890, Henry Ford was hired as an engineer for the Detroit Edison Company. In 1893, his natural talents earned him a promotion to chief engineer. Although Ford was not an engineer by education, he acquired the position by his talent and dedication. You can't learn in school what the world is going to do next year. Alongside working on his job, he also started working on something he had always been fascinated with: building automobiles. All the while, Ford developed his plans for a horseless carriage. In 1892, Ford built his first gasoline-powered buggy, which had a two-cylinder 4-horsepower engine. In 1896, he constructed his first model car, the Ford quadricycle. Within the same year, he attended a meeting with Edison executives and found himself presenting his automobile plans to Thomas Alva Edison. The lighting genius encouraged Ford to build a second, better model. Thinking is the hardest work therein, which is probably the reason why so few engage in it. By 1898, Ford was awarded with his first patent for a carburetor. In 1899, with money raised from investors following the development of a third model car, Ford left Edison Illuminating Company to pursue his car-making business full-time. He founded the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899. However, the automobiles produced by the company did not perform well at the market, and very soon he was forced to close down the business. Obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off your goal. Failure did not deter him. Instead, he started working on improving the quality of his automobiles and successfully raised a 26-horsepower automobile in October 1901. Then he teamed up the stockholders in his Detroit Automobile Company to form the Henry Ford Company in November 1901. However, some issues came up between him and the other stockholders, and he left the company, which was later renamed Cadillac Automobile Company. I do not believe a man can ever leave his business. He ought to think of it by day and dream of it by night. Undaunted by the failure of yet another venture, he continued to pursue his passion of building automobiles. He built several racing cars over the ensuing years, including the 999 Racer, which looked quite promising. In 1903, Henry incorporated the Ford Motor Company. The original investors included Henry Ford, Alexander Y. Malcolmson, the Dodge brothers, and John S. Gray, among others. Around this time, the race driver Barney Oldfield drove the 999 around the country, making the Ford brand known throughout the United States. The company launched the Model T in October 1908. The vehicle had a steering wheel on the left, an idea which other automobile companies soon copied. The model proved to be highly successful as it was not only affordable, but also very simple to drive and easy and cheap to repair. The Model T was so successful that Ford had to greatly expand his production in order to meet the ever-increasing demand. In 1913, Ford, along with the company staffs, developed a moving assembly line for automobiles. Henry Ford installed the first moving assembly line for the mass production of an entire automobile. His innovation reduced the time it took to build a car from more than 12 hours to 2 hours and 30 minutes. The company developed techniques of mass production which enabled them to greatly increase their output. The man who will use his skill and constructive imagination to see how much he can give for $1 instead of how little he can give for $1 is bound to succeed. The Model T dominated the automobile market for several years, and by 1918, half of all the cars in America were Model Ts. In 1918, Ford also handed over the presidency of Ford Motor Company to his son Edsel Ford, even though he retained the final decision authority. By the mid-1920s, the sale of the Model T had begun to decline. Thus, the company introduced the Ford Model A in 1927, which sold profitably till 1931. But the company continued to decline in the 1930s, and by 1936, Ford Motor Company had fallen to third place in the United States market, behind both General Motors and Chrysler Corporation. Henry Ford was a pacifist, and when the Second World War broke out in 1939, he opposed the United States' entry into the war. However, when America entered the war, Ford Motor Company became one of the major US military contractors, supplying airplanes, engines, jeeps, and tanks. A tragedy befell the aging Ford in 1943 when his son Edsel died of cancer. Even though Henry Ford formally resumed control of the company after his son's death, he no longer exercised absolute authority. The key decisions were taken by others in his name, and he was increasingly sidelined. Eventually, his grandson, Henry Ford II, was made the president. Ford was awarded the Franklin Institute's Elliott Crescent Medal in 1928. In 1938, Ford was awarded Nazi Germany's Grand Cross of the German Eagle, a medal given to foreigners sympathetic to Nazism. Henry Ford died of cerebral hemorrhage on April 7, 1947, at the ripe age of 83, near his Dearborn estate, Fairlane. Some of his famous quotes are: "An idealist is a person who helps other people to be prosperous. The highest use of capital is not to make more money, but to make money do more for the betterment of life. You can't build a reputation on what you are going to do. Quality means doing it right when no one is looking. Don't find fault, find a remedy." Thank you.